It's great to be here. I should explain the slight background is in terms of actually reset. I actually worked for a previous administration. I did 6 years for Tony Blair, and I left government and written a book about various things about if you were Prime Minister, things you might do, and some of them included things like use behavioral science and actually be much more serious about well-being, we're talking about now. I was rather surprised actually in 2010 then to be asked to come back into government and try and do some of those things. So what I'm going to very concisely try and do is show you what we do actually, and it's very nuts and bolts, use of behavioral science. But then I'm going to lead you back to, well, why would we worry about well-being? And to what extent would it take us back to that area? And also leave you with a question, which is to what extent is it our business anyway, in government, or indeed anybody's? Okay, so let's see how we're doing. So this is just by background. This is who we kind of work for. We work for the Cabinet Secretary and the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister. Just that's what we do. We sit, but we actually have a kind of skunk work operation essentially in government. And as Dan says, we do a lot of experiments. We've probably done more randomized controlled trials in the last couple of years than all the British government has ever done, which has been a really interesting period. But let me just show you about what we sort of do. Here's an example of a nudge, if you like, a behavioral insight, an old one, but it's probably saved your life today. It saved your life probably on many occasions. It makes the economy work, long before we had the internet. What's this amazing nudge? It's this, lines on the road. Fantastic. It's an absolutely genius invention if you think about it. And for most of the history actually of driving in the UK, it wasn't a law at all, actually, what side of the road. It's just when you're learning to drive, you follow the code. And someone says it might be a good idea, try this side rather than the other, generally speaking. And originally, there weren't lines on the road at all, of course. And actually, in a place called Manny Corner in the early 1920s, these newfangled cars kept hitting each other. Someone had the great idea, well, you know, we could have passed a law or had bigger fines. Why don't we just paint a line in the road? And actually, it worked really well, a nice local experiment. So in some sense, that's a kind of example of an everyday nudge. And we do lots of those sorts of things. So let me just move on. I thought I could just quickly throw you sort of 3 quick examples of nuts and bolts, and then I'm going to go through as the more strategic and get back to well-being. So here's an example. And remember, by way of background and reset terms, you've got administration in 2010, which finds it doesn't really have any money because of austerity, and you've got an administration that doesn't want to mandate, use legislation all the time. So how could you nudge and have bigger impacts? And one of the early questions, well, we might not be able to make everybody feel completely happy about taxes. It'd be great if we could do that, but could we just actually make people more ready to pay them? So this is a block on unpaid tax, and we just put one line into the letter. We just one line, and we just tell people something which happens to be true. 9 out of 10 people, most people, pay their tax on time. What if we just do that? Well, it turns out it has quite a big impact. Here's our control group. 9 out of 10 people pay their tax on time. Which is actually more specific. Most people in your area pay their tax on time. That's even better. If we flip it around and just say, you are one of the few people who haven't paid your tax on time, it works actually really well, and it's easy. If you put those together, an even bigger impact. So just one line, a little bit of extra information about something, essentially telling you that other people are more virtuous than you thought they were, has an enormous impact, and the marginal cost is almost nothing. So here's another one, loft insulation. So our Department of Environment often come along. Could you give us another $1 billion to subsidize loft insulation? It's kind of an interesting puzzle, this, because it looks like it's a no-brainer anyway, because you get your money back in the first year. So why wouldn't people insulate? So we have a think about this, and we conclude one of the reasons, actually, it turns out, you've got a third of homes in the UK still under-insulated, isn't to do with the money. It's just because people's lofts are full of stuff which they should have thrown away years ago. They've still got their kids' school books and all the rest of it. So we thought, well, let's run these things. There's our control group. It's just, we baselining it to 1. You know, here's an offer to get insulation. We offer you an even bigger discount, particularly if you get together with your neighbours. Or actually, the alternative, we just say, we'll offer a service to clear your loft for you, put it into 3 piles, chuck it away, et cetera, keep this stuff. Oh, and people have to pay for it, actually. So there we go. Here's the result. Nearly a 5-fold increase. So we didn't need more money. Money wasn't the issue. Actually, we just had to get into the kind of core issue and think, well, what was the problem? And one last example. Getting people into employment. I mean, actually, our main work is growth. And what can we do? And this is an interesting intervention, because we're not going to change people's skills in this particular intervention. We're just going to make a few small changes. One is we just look at the paperwork. When you go into a job centre, many of you would never have done this. Actually, you have a whole load of bits of paper to sign, 8 or 9 different documents. In fact, one of them, it turned out, when we looked at it, was they needed to keep a copy of your signature. having asked you for 8 other signatures. So we changed that. We get people, instead of thinking about what did you do in the last couple of weeks, which happens in most welfare states to show that you've been looking for work, to forget all that, think about what you're going to do in the next couple of weeks. And think about it in specific ways. So if you want to affect behavior, you prompt people in very specific, like what are you going to, when exactly? After they've taken the kids to school, I'm going to do the following. I'm going to get on this website, and I'm going to search for this kind of job, and so on. And the other thing we get them to do is get people to think about what they do well, not only what they do badly. A lot of welfare ends up defining people by what they can't do rather than what they can do. And we get them to think about it in a positive way. So randomized controlled trial, that's what we do. Is we take an area and we split the people into 2 samples. This is before it goes along. And then here comes our intervention, kicks in, and there we go. So we got randomized, to one stream or another. And as you can see, what happens basically is we get a 5 to 10 percentage point increase in the number of off benefits at 13 weeks, or if you like in other terms, it's a 10 to 20% increase in the number of people who are off benefits 13 weeks. So that's not deeply about well-being, but what I wanted to show you is just briefly, this is what we kind of do, nuts and bolts. But what's interesting about it is I'll try and show you, it's not only small things that are affected by the sort of choice architecture, but actually big decisions in life too. So what else do we do? Well, we use this systemically in other ways as well. So we try and get rid of regulation. Red tape challenge, can we find an alternative? If you want to do that, you have to think of, well, what would an alternative be? So why do we have, for example, lots of inspection in many areas of public life? People in white coats checking on care homes. Well, why don't we just ask people themselves? Would you recommend it to other people? Would you recommend this care home to someone else? And actually, that is incredibly transformative of the quality of service we know in other domains. It means that the individual starts thinking about, well, actually, the person in front, you start to treat them with more respect and dignity when you move to a net recommender score. We do things about how, I'm not going to go into detail, but about giving feedback on government buys a lot of stuff. Imagine we just told the world, someone bought this website, it was really effective, it was a small provider. Actually, why don't we tell the rest of the world that's true? Changes markets, or one last one around using behavioral insights in relation to markets more fundamentally. We live in a world, as we've heard, where there's far more data, but often actually consumers themselves only have partial access to it. So in an energy market, for example, 6 major producers, and yet we have 500 odd tariffs. What could we do to make that a little different? Well, what happens if people had access to that same data? So imagine on your electricity bill, you would have, of course, a QR code. And because people, when you call up to switch your supplier, would you know the difference? Would you not? Do you use more electricity than other people or less? Actually, most people don't know the answer to that question. It can all be in your QR code. And then, of course, you can just put your smartphone against it. Hey, presto, here's the best tariff for you. You can click. It takes friction out of a market. It changes markets fundamentally using these kind of behavioral insights. Right, well, what has that got to do with well-being? Let me take you back to the subject in a second. Well, one of the most fundamental influences on our behavior is, of course, other people. You've heard glimpses of that already. And the curious thing about often how we design public services is we don't enable them to do that. So just to give a personal example, I have 2 boys, and my youngest son had a tracheostomy for the first 4 years of his life, and he's fine now, whatever. And we said, actually, to the myriad of consultants who we work with, we'd be really happy to look after someone else's kid for an evening or whatever. We'd like to reciprocate. People do often want to do that. Of course, we were never asked, even when we made an active offer. And it's a very curious thing. We often build services in the public sector that don't enable people to support and help each other. And it's a very powerful thing that people want to do, as well as efficiency. Can it be done differently? Here's just a screenshot from, this is a patient hotel in Sweden. And the key thing you notice when you open the door to one of these things is there's 2 beds in the room. Actually, you're encouraged. You're able to stay with your partner or your child, as opposed to being told the visiting hours are the following. What do you get in patient hotels? Well, you get higher patient satisfaction. Well, that's pretty good, nice to have. But you also get better clinical outcomes, and actually, it costs less as well. So why don't we design services that enable people to essentially use this, what I've something called the hidden wealth of nations, to help each other. So we're using this stuff in relation to changing nuts and bolts processes, more fundamentally changing how you might regulate or manage markets. But the bit that hangs over the top, which I wanted to get back to, was, well, actually, what are you trying to do ultimately? It turns out that it's not just, as it were, small decisions about whether you're going to, do your loft insulated or whatever, which are affected by these small details. We use shortcuts, essentially, to make these decisions. But it's true for big decisions in life as well. We often, what career shall we be? Shall I be a civil servant, or shall I become a commercial lawyer? I could find out, well, how much I might earn in those professions, but it's much harder to find out, will I be happy? And it seems like a lot of these things are essentially shrouded. I mean, what's fantastic about Mike's work, for example, is he works through it systematically and says, well, actually, how would you spend your money? And he's got a whole load of things. You can read his new book, actually, about it. But when we look at it at the national level, so we saw, sorry, this is some of the things we use. I won't go into details. We use controlled trials, but let's just get onto this last slide. This is across the world. I mean, many of you, I'm sure, have seen this graph before, but it's still remarkable. So here's GDP per capita, and here's life satisfaction. Now, fortunately, unlike actually the US or indeed the UK data, when we look at it over time, and it's flat, an interesting puzzle, when we look across countries, there's a very strong relationship between essentially GDP cap, wealth, and life satisfaction. Sort of good to know. There's the UK, by the way. But what's interesting is to think about the spread, right, on any given point. Why is it? We can feel pretty good. We're above the regression line, say above Japan or Hong Kong, despite similar levels of essentially wealth. But then why is it that Australia is above us? Well, the Danes. Look at how preposterously happy the Danes are. And interestingly, they've been getting happier for the last 30 years in their data. It's really interesting. So what is it that explains this? And partly, of course, GDP per capita does have an impact. You can see it there. And the same is true at the local level, by the way. We have the data now in the UK, so you get to see it at the local level. It's all kinds of other things that matter. What a surprise. Do you know your neighbours? Do you think other people can be trusted? Enormous variations across countries and levels of social trust. So the Danes live in a really high trust country, right? Sort of 70% of would say, yes, most others can be trusted. In the UK, it would be 30 to 40%. In some countries, it's less than 10% by quite a big margin. How long's your commute? All these other factors impact on your well-being quite profoundly. And so first start is to at least de-shroud it, to reveal it. So I make a mistake. I commute from Cambridge to London every day. It's nuts. I can see the data. The longer your commute, essentially, the economists say I should be just as happy because I'm going to get a bigger earnings and bigger house. But actually, it's not. The longer your commute, the less happy you are. And actually, the less happy your partner is as well. So we seem to make mistakes in these decisions that we make. The last question I guess I leave you with, which is true for the very small details of, is it right to use behavioral insights in policy? But more fundamentally, when you get into well-being, well, who is it to decide, actually? To what extent is it, what is the role of government? And that's something which we all sort of need to explore, particularly since many of the things that drive our well-being aren't under our individual control, but actually rest as much about what other people around us are doing. So there we go. Thank you.
Great. So the question of paternalism, I think, is central. So when we do our little experiments, it's affecting our students. When we do things with companies have some right. What are the limits of how much government should influence people? And how do you actually communicate that in a way that is more palatable?
Well, I mean, for using behavioral science, I think in general, it's really important that when we do randomized controlled trials, I always feel we're not only doing that in order to see is it effective to do this small change, but also we're testing public acceptability. And that's a really important part about what we do. So say where a number of countries, including the UK, recently have changed defaults around pensions. It was absolutely key. The only reason why that policy, I think, was able to hold the line was because there have been very big public consultations, where essentially the dynamic is the public are saying to us, we give you permission to make that change, actually. And this is very true for a lot of lifestyle issues. And of course, as soon as you get into issues about well-being, then fundamentally so.
Yeah. Were there any things that you thought would be a great idea, but public acceptance is very low, so you're...
Yes.
Can we get an example?
Well, of course, there are some, for example, the use of incentives, where you use lotteries in some areas, for example, which people might feel, is that right for government to do or is it not? But when you come to well-being more fundamentally, and to kind of get us back to the core discussion. So we know one of the things about income, right, is that income, getting the new Ferrari doesn't make you that much happier, is because you adapt to it, and also has negative externality. So your neighbors then just making do with their BMW feel bad. But there are other things that have positive externalities. So actually helping other people, volunteering. If you live in a society or community where there's high levels of volunteering, even if you don't volunteer, you can nonetheless see the increase in your well-being. And so this is the interesting, I mean, that's what normally governments and communities get involved in, where you get these strong externalities. It's not just about an individual choice. But still, I think we need to up our game in terms of our capacity to get kind of collective decision. Like, is that what we want to do? Choice we make together.
Very good. Last question. Are you ever concerned that in your role in the British government trying to increase happiness and well-being, that the criticism would be that it's because you have no GDP growth?
Well, it's an obvious criticism, isn't it? Hopefully we can do both those things. And actually, as you can see across countries, that actually, you know, for a start is just to even get, I mean, Eric's talking about this more, just get information, actually. And so the UK has led, for example, on these very large-scale surveys of life satisfaction and do you think what you do is worthwhile. It's not just for governments to use this. It's just to make that data available for people. You know, if you're an 18-year-old and trying to decide what to do in life or where to live, actually, that's what it will drive. So
very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.